Hello everyone, I'm Colin and welcome back to my very professional recording studio. I have to tell you kind of a funny story. In case you missed it, I just recently interviewed Dr. Tobias Birch, who is a lipedema expert and played a pivotal role in my huge lipedema video. On the off chance that he sees this, he's not going to watch this, but on the off chance that he does, I say this with the most respect that I can muster. But tell me why, after everything was filmed and edited, and I sent him an unlisted link as a courtesy to just be like, here it is, tell me why he said that I needed to change my background because it was unprofessional. Like your work, hate 1997 Holiday Barbie. Nah, he didn't say that, but it was implied. Still, overall, great experience. Huge honor to be able to do that. But I just learned that there's no room for whimsy in medicine, I suppose. Coincidentally, that interview felt like it came at the absolute perfect time, because we actually recorded that literally the day before GlitterAndLazers' debut episode of her podcast came out. I did get quite a few new followers from the Lipedema video and for that interview, and so in case anyone isn't clear about my origin story, if you will, I spent a lot of time on this channel talking about the influencer GlitterAndLazers, real name Anna O'Brien. And I admit I've been pretty snarky towards her, but it's mostly because from the beginning I've been concerned that she has been spreading misinformation on the internet. And so I listened to this new podcast, and well, let's just say I have many pages of notes. So the podcast is called Medical Detectives, and its main goal, I believe, is to explore kind of medical mysteries, and I believe their goal in the future is to bring on guests to talk about their own bizarre medical experiences. But the very first episode is Anna telling her own story. And in this episode, she's being interviewed by her co-host, who is a Dr. Erin Nance. It'll probably come as no surprise to you to learn that Dr. Nance is a TikTok doctor, a TikToker, if you will. I feel like at this point, Anna has some kind of contractual obligation to only ever work with medical professionals who have a social media following. But for the sake of the podcast, it definitely makes sense to feature a co-host who is a doctor and on social media. But naturally, I'm like, well, who is this person, right? Like, who is Dr. Nance? And what does she say on TikTok? Why does Anna like her enough that she would do a whole podcast with her? And I'll include timestamps also if you just want to go ahead and skip to the podcast reaction part of this video. But I think it's extremely important to dive into who is this person. So Dr. Nance is an orthopedic hand surgeon, but for some reason she's become especially fascinated with talking about under-recognized conditions, or obviously medical mysteries, especially those that impact women. I am not here to refute the fact that women are often misdiagnosed and underdiagnosed. So at first, I'm feeling at least a little hopeful, but I will say there is always a part of me whenever I see any kind of doctor, medical professional, etc. on TikTok, it automatically makes me cringe. There are a few professionals that I follow, therapists, professors, doctors, etc., who I'm a fan of, and they're on TikTok, they're on Instagram, etc. Otherwise, I wouldn't know who they are, The difference is, I think that a lot of the people that I follow are specifically on social media to combat rampant misinformation that happens on social media. So I was curious about what I would find on Dr. Nance's TikTok. Her username is Little Misdiagnosed, which I ain't gonna lie, that's funny. So I just scrolled through for a bit. It didn't take me long to find this TikTok, which I did play a little bit of it at the end of my last video, but I'm gonna go ahead and play the whole TikTok in its entirety.
If you've ever been told by a doctor that you're too fat and being fat is a risk factor for having a complication with potential surgery, this video is for you. We have been focused on the wrong thing this whole friggin' time. There is one golden nugget of information that I've been swirling in the back of my brain for the past 15 years since one of my mentors told me in surgery training. I was an orthopedic surgery resident and I was on the trauma service, so we were dealing with tons of hip fracture patients. Okay, these are usually your grandma and your grandpa, they take a fall and they break their hip. And he asked me, Erin, do you know what the #1 predictor of whether or not this patient is going to live or die? And I said, well, it's probably based on their comorbidities, if they have, heart problems or lung problems. No. Well, what about if they're able to do physical therapy and get out of bed and start walking sooner? No. Well, there's some studies about your BMI, so if you have a higher BMI, you're at greater risk. No. He told me that the greatest risk factor had to do with the patient's diet, and that if the patient wasn't able to get the right nutrients, that was the greatest risk factor for dying of a hip fracture. To this day, I spend 0 minutes talking to my patients about nutrition and the importance of nutrition in their healing process. And all along, the patients have been asking, is there anything that I can do that can help? I'm like, do your physical therapy, keep your bandage clean and dry. But I was missing literally the most important point. The only time I talk to patients about their diet is when I put the fear of God in them that if they eat after midnight, the case will be canceled, so do not eat anything after midnight. And we've been body shaming people left and right about how their BMIs are too elevated and how that's the greatest risk factor for having a bad outcome. That's not to say that having an elevated BMI does sometimes affect your body to heal, but we're missing the greater point. If we stopped fixating on people's obesity as the root cause for complications and instead turned our attention to helping people with their nutrition, which they need to help recover, I'd be curious to see what the numbers show. So I looked up this article, which talks about using nutrition as a risk factor for dying after having a surgery for a broken hip. They basically administered this less than 10-minute survey, which stratified patients into being adequately nourished, being malnourished, or risk for being malnourished. This chart is crazy. So if you were considered well-nourished, at the end of 1 year, approximately 17% of patients died after having surgery for hip fracture. If you were at risk for being malnourished, this middle line, you had a 26% chance of dying 1 year after having hip fracture surgery. And if you were malnourished, you had a whopping 46% chance of dying 1 year after having hip fracture surgery. I'm sure there's a bunch of nutritionists on this app who can give me actually more relevant and recent information, but would love to spread the word and education about the importance of nutrients rather than your weight in helping recover from surgery.
Now, I will always disclaim, I am not a doctor, I am not a medical professional of any kind, and you can tell by my background, but I at least hope I have the track record, and I have proven to you that I do know how to at least generally parse scientific papers. So I'm like, okay, well, she showed a scientific paper as a reference for what she's saying. What does the study say? So the study is called Mini Nutritional Assessment and Mortality After Hip Fracture Surgery in the Elderly. And already, based on that title, I can think of a few problems. This is a very specific study. Dr. Nance wants to make the case that nutrition is way more important than factors like weight or BMI in determining mortality in these patients. So how did they determine who was malnourished? They used something that I had never heard of before that's called the Mini Nutritional Assessment. And, medical professionals in the audience are probably familiar with this. I am not, because I'm not a professional, but this is apparently a pretty common and valuable tool. So the Mini Nutritional Assessment, or MNA, is, well, the one I'm looking at says Nestle Nutrition Institute, which makes me, anyway. So here are the items on the assessment. Has food intake declined over the past 3 months? Weight loss during the past 3 months? Mobility? Has patient suffered psychological stress or acute disease in the past 3 months? Neuropsychological problems? Body mass index? And calf circumference. So Dr. Nance is trying to say BMI isn't the end-all be-all, and weight isn't the end-all be-all for predicting mortality. And yes, on the surface level, I absolutely agree with that, but that's not what this study says. This study is specifically looking at elderly people who have undergone a particular surgery. I should also mention that all of the people in this study are in their early mid-80s. Malnutrition is a real problem, especially a problem in the elderly, and especially a problem for people who are undergoing surgery. Your body needs to be able to feed off of something to heal you. But it seems to me that this assessment is really assessing not just malnutrition in the sense of being deficient, but it's assessing malnutrition in are you starving? Are you underweight even? And I think it's been pretty well established that quite often being underweight is even more dangerous for you than being extremely overweight. So this really doesn't come as a surprise at all. And I feel personally that this Dr. Nance is kind of misrepresenting this study to make a point that it doesn't make. And not only that, but if you scroll down to the discussion section, the authors of this study come right out and say, although the relation with preoperative nutritional status and postoperative outcome is shown in different studies, it is not the only factor that influences fracture healing and postoperative outcome. In addition, elderly with a poor nutritional status often have underlying comorbidity or cognitive problems. However, nutritional status is an important factor in outcome and can be improved, and thereby we think that it is important to know the nutritional status prior to surgery. Couldn't agree more. I think this study is fine, it's great, does right what it says on the tin. Dr. Nance is trying to extrapolate this very specific extreme example to everybody, it feels like. This is the kind of stuff that makes me really cringe when I see doctors on social media, because quite often on the rare chance that someone actually does put up a study for you to look at, I find, just as a generalization, they're usually doing it for one of two reasons. Number one, TikTok is very short form content. There's not enough time for them to dig into the study, so they're showing it in the hopes that you will go look it up yourself. Or number two, TikTok is very short form content. There's not enough time to get into the article, so they put it up knowing that most people are not going to go look it up themselves. I will let you decide which is the case here. Actually, you know what? Go ahead and ban TikTok. It is irredeemable. And I didn't scroll through the entirety of all of Dr. Nance's content on TikTok, but I will tell you, it didn't take me very long to find that. I literally just found a random TikTok with a source cited and thought, well, let me take a chance and see what this source says. I didn't try very hard to do this, is what I'm telling you. It seems Anna has a gift for cherry picking doctors who will say the things she wants them to say. Short story long, I came into this podcast with even less faith than I did before. So let's actually talk about the podcast, shall we? So, like I mentioned, Dr. Nance is actually interviewing Anna about her own medical journey, and Anna starts talking about her childhood.
My mom took me to this really shady doctor in the middle of nowhere, and I remember even as a little kid being like, this place is sketch. And went in, there was one of those little windows that they pulled open, and I looked inside, and the woman asked me 3 questions. Not one of them was my age or my weight or anything like that. It was literally do you have a heart murmur? Do you have any of these other conditions, diabetes, I think? And this is at 8 years old. Shut the door, took me in. This older man gave me a speech about why I was awful because I was overweight. And then he wrote me his prescription for what I now know was fen-phen.
And if you're not familiar, I'm not super familiar either. I'm vaguely aware of fen-phen. It was a weight loss drug that is no longer used because of the side effects. I believe severe cardiac side effects. And in no world should that have been given to an 8-year-old child. If Anna's story here is true, I'm truly sorry that she went through that. That's not something a parent should ever do. It's not something a doctor should ever do. And she shouldn't have been given that, right? I can fully agree. That being said, there are some parts of this story that continue to demonstrate that Anna is extremely medically illiterate.
So the changes in my body really started to happen around puberty. I just started to gain weight, which was kind of unusual because I was always a really active kid.
And I harp on this so much because it was really important for me when I was going on my own little weight loss journey to understand that what you put in your mouth is a million billion times more impactful to your weight than your exercise is. And I would say I can't necessarily blame Anna for thinking this way because I thought this way. Tons of people think this way. But the problem is at this point in Anna's journey where she's been consulting so many medical professionals, she's been consulting so many fitness professionals, nutrition professionals, etc. She should know this by now. And I'm struggling to place the blame on the professionals that she has consulted throughout the course of her life. You know what I'm saying? She tells what I think is a very illuminating story about a cheeseburger.
Everything that, in my opinion, at the time tasted good was in the garbage. We were left with brown rice, flavorless chicken, shredded wheat, and vegetables. That's it. And I remember, and I have this very vivid memory of when I was about, I want to say 10 or 11. I went to my friend Nikki S's house and her mom made me a cheeseburger. And I remember sitting there eating that cheeseburger being like, this is the best thing I've ever had in my entire life. This cheeseburger, wow. And this like cheese, it wasn't even probably that good of a cheeseburger, but because I'd eaten such terrible food for like a while.
Like we're talking In-N-Out cheeseburger or
Yeah, like it was probably like McDonald's cheeseburger, but I just remember being like, oh my God. I was like, my life has forever changed. Like music played, lights flashed. Like it was like this amazing thing. And I didn't die. There were no issues. And I just had a normal day.
And like, I'm not here to diagnose anyone. Like I said before, I am not any kind of medical professional. There's only so much you can know just based on someone's social media presence, but I feel like based on a lot of the things that Anna has said and posted on social media, it's very clear to me she has a very complicated relationship with food, which is really interesting because she specifically says in this podcast that she's never had a problem with binging or overeating.
Again, I never was like a binge eater or an overeater, so it kind of was like my activity just jumped up and that's where the weight went.
Your literal own self would beg to differ. And I would like to thank the Reddit for providing this screenshot. I'm not going to try to draw too much attention to the Reddit because I'm sure they wouldn't appreciate that, but there it is. This is from Anna's blog, which was largely focused on weight loss back in the day. And she talks about that. Well, she actually doesn't talk about the blog, but she does talk about kind of that period of her life where she was a young adult. And it seems like all of her friendships were kind of focused around weight loss. Doesn't sound particularly healthy to me for that to be the entire dynamic. So she and her friends joined Weight Watchers.
Lost about 100 pounds that way just by literally getting active as part of this Weight Watchers group. That's where the weight went. But then it stopped. I had lost weight and gained weight before, but this was very different because I was gaining weight while still maintaining a really healthy lifestyle. So I was still going to spin class. I was still running. I was still eating healthy. I was still walking to and from work. So it didn't make sense that I was gaining weight back. I honestly didn't know what to think. I felt very cheated. I felt very angry because I felt like I did everything right and this is my predicament. So I think I started to isolate myself because I was embarrassed that I wasn't able to keep up with my friends who were making, oh God, already crying, who were making all of these amazing changes in their life.
So, there's been evidence in her life thus far that she is capable of losing weight. But it's really weird because when she talks about being in Weight Watchers, it's really confusing. You said you were in Weight Watchers, but you're attributing your weight loss to the exercise. Factually, I don't think that's true. I think it kind of sets the stage for what I believe to be true, which is that Anna is structuring her story in a very specific way to make herself look better and look like she's always been doing the right thing and that her body just hasn't been responding. So whatever, she got popular on social media. She got really into the body positivity movement.
And now was presented with a world where I didn't have to prove anything, or at least it felt like I didn't have to prove anything. And that was, for lack of a better word, addictive. So the acceptance of a bigger body was on the way of being more accepted versus less. And so there was a lot of advocacy. There was a lot of supportive people. Don't get me wrong, still bad people out there saying mean things. That is the internet. But it was definitely a better place. I will always be grateful for that. That said, my time in that community did cause some harm. And I think that that's really hard to say because I don't want people to feel betrayed or hurt or like I'm biting the hand that fed me. But there's a lot of things in that community that make going to the doctor or even doing basic everyday things scary. There's a lot of discussion about how the medical community doesn't support fat bodies, which is true in a lot of instances, but it doesn't mean that all medical professionals are out to get plus size people.
Honestly, this is something I can relate to myself. In my life, I have been chunky more than I have been thin, And, you have a lot of complicated feelings growing up that way. I also, felt a lot of benefit from like the whole body positivity thing, but just like Anna talks about, there's also a darker side.
And I kept pushing myself physically because around this point, I started to feel in my body really broken down. So as I'm in this community, I just kept thinking, oh, the reason my knee hurts is because I'm fatter. The reason my ankle hurts is because I'm fatter. The reason my thighs hurt are because I'm fatter. The reason I'm tired is because I'm fatter. The reason when I stand up, I almost pass out is because I'm fatter. All of these things just became related to the weight, and that's just how my body was. And so I initially pretended like a lot of those things didn't exist.
So she talks about all these horrible symptoms she's having. She says she was in therapy for a year, and I have to wonder if this was her BetterHelp arc. I will credit whatever kind of therapy she was doing for this, but she finally broke down and decided to go see a doctor. She found a doctor that she felt would help her without being judgmental. And her first instinct was like, give me Ozempic.
And it took me a year of therapy to get to the point where I could mentally see a doctor because I was so paranoid from all the things I'd heard. And when I went in to see him, he sat down, and honestly, I walked in with going back to shots. I said, just give me Ozempic. Just do it. If it'll make me feel better, I can't feel this way, because I honestly believed that the solution to my problem was that I needed to lose weight. So I had worked through therapy to accept that losing weight could help my health. I went through a lot of things to try to accept the fact that I was going to have to lose weight, right? And that wasn't a bad thing, but it was about feeling better. So I went into this doctor and I'm like, just give me the shot. And he literally looked at me and was like, how can I give you a medicine if I don't know if you're sick? And it kind of took me back. He's like, I'm not giving you anything until we read your labs. He's like, I don't know what's going on with you. And that is not a professional thing to do. Just hand over medication to a patient I've just met.
She phrased this in such a way that was like, this doctor was so different. And maybe that's been her experience. But in my opinion, that should be like a totally normal thing a doctor would do. I came away from it thinking like, yep, that's what doctors do before they prescribe things. She finds out she's anemic and has vitamin deficiencies, but very importantly finds out that she has Hashimoto's, which affects your thyroid. And you know what? I think there's a very good chance that she probably gained weight partially because of the Hashimoto's. Second video I ever watched of her was her talking about this experience of going to the doctor and realizing she had all of these issues and being like, oh my God, go to the doctor. It doesn't matter if they're fat phobic. You just have to do it for your health. You just got to grin and bear it, because your health is way more important than your feelings. And I can't disagree.
And if they tell you to lose weight, well, if that's the worst thing that could happen, I think it's worth it, to be really honest. I think it's worth going to the doctor and learning why you feel the way you feel, even if you may not like what they have to say.
She does a lot of double speak back and forth on that kind of thing. After that experience, treating those things, a lot of the problems came back.
It was good for a couple months, but then a lot of the stuff started to come back. So I did get relief. It's just not in the permanency that I expected. So I started to have fatigue again. I started to have anemia that we couldn't get under control. And my doctor was like, I think something's wrong with your menstrual cycle, your lady bit. Something's not right down there. So he said, I'm going to refer you to an OBGYN. I probably needed to see one anyway, because again, I hadn't been to the doctor in a really long time. So he referred me to someone that was with my insurance, and I walked into the room, and he had just built this great perspective of doctors for me. So I went in with full hope and full glory. The entire medical community has changed. Everything is great. We're respected and cared about now. Yay. And this woman was absolutely terrible to me. She would not give me the treatment that my doctor had requested I'd have, because she said that I was just too fat for it. And she refused to give me a pap smear for the same reason. She said that the only thing that was wrong with me was that I was too fat. And repeatedly told me this, to the point where I broke down crying in the parking lot outside. I messaged my doctor in the little portal and I said, I guess I'm just too fat for a normal period. And he was like, listen, I have a friend. He's not going to be covered by your insurance, but he's good. He will listen to you, and he's my friend. Again, I don't know if I can take it. If this happens again, I don't know if I can keep going. And he sat me down. He said, I'm not here to treat your weight. I'm here to treat your illness. Again, that same kind of messaging where I'm like, okay, this guy has got it. So he did all of the things, and he said, I'm going to biopsy you. You shouldn't be bleeding this much. You are on all of these iron supplements and you're still anemic. That doesn't seem right. So they ended up doing a biopsy. They did find a growth in my uterus, and it was inconclusive. The test was inconclusive. So it could have been cancerous. It could not have been. And he's like, we're going to have a surgery date for you in 3 weeks. You need to get it out. So like I went in from hearing nothing's wrong with you, you're just fat too, to hearing you have a growth and it needs to be removed immediately because we're concerned about its size.
I think people experience these kinds of things, especially people Anna's size experience these kind of things. But part of the problem comes when she discusses later she eventually did get the operation that she needed. And she briefly mentions for like half a second, there were issues with anesthesia.
So I was scheduled for surgery 3 weeks later. I had to have some really tough conversations about anesthesia and what that meant in a bigger body. But again, because I had a doctor that actually was educated about plus size, he was able to find an anesthesiologist to work with him that had worked on bigger bodies before. And I was able to have a really successful surgery. Fortunately, when we came out of that surgery, it was benign, the growth.
A lot of doctors won't operate on people Anna's size because of the issues with anesthesia. Not necessarily because they don't want to help you, but because they don't want you to die on the operating table. So she had the operation. Once again, she had that thing again where she felt better for a time, but then all the symptoms came back, the fatigue and the pain and all that stuff. And she talks about a campaign that she did, and she never names the campaign, but we all know, or at least I know, people who are familiar with Anna probably know, it was that It's Bigger Than Me campaign.
One of the biggest misconceptions I think people have about me is that, like, I eat all the time or something. I actually often have to remind myself to eat.
Which was by Novo Nordisk, the creators of Ozempic and Wegovy. And we already know that Anna was on Wegovy for quite some time. So she talks about, this campaign that she did. And I guess somehow that campaign led her into meeting an obesity specialist who did prescribe her weight loss medication.
So I ended up working on a campaign related to weight, and I met a doctor that I really loved who studied obesity conditions. And I decided to take a next step and try to figure out what was going on by going to see her. So I started driving to Houston once a month to see this doctor. And I did start taking Ozempic, but the weirdest thing happened through that process is, yes, I lost weight, but not as quickly as they would have imagined.
She talks about how the medication reduced her pain and gave her more mobility, but she lost weight a lot slower than expected. And I'm sorry, but that's not that surprising to me. I think you always hear people talk about being on weight loss medication and focusing a lot on protein and whatnot. Yeah, there's a reason for that. But the problem is that Anna promoted so much protein junk food.
This is my snack basket. And this is just some of my snacks. So one of the things I do that's kind of, because I am really obsessed with this, snacking is really important to me.
And it's hard not to hear her say, well, I lost weight slower than expected, and not wonder if that was a factor. Here's where she talks more in depth about something that I've heard her mention in passing before. And it's that she had some kind of gene panel and learned that she has really rare obesity genes.
So she submits a swab for genetic testing for what's called the Rare Obesity Panel. Now, this panel is not the same as the obesity gene panel that you see a lot of people are doing research on right now. These are for conditions that are classified as rare. So like the weird ones. My doctor basically sat me down and she said, listen, I've never had a patient have one of these genes personally, but it is something that we just want to eliminate because your body is not showing normal behavior. So went in, had my rare obesity panel done, and lo and behold, I come back with 2 genes. So essentially what happened when I got my genetic results back is they give you a little counselor that sits down with you and walks you through your genetic tests and what they mean. One of the genes is a known gene. It has a lot of different things associated with it. And then additionally, they were like, oh, by the way, these are so rare, no one will ever research them. So good luck.
When I hear obesity gene, my first thought is obviously, well, how do you define that? What is the gene doing? Because, as we've discussed time and time again, thermodynamics do indeed apply to the human body. So there's probably one of 2 factors. Either whatever the genes are lowering her metabolism, or they are increasing her hunger cues. Those are really the only things I can think of that make sense. Because I'm sorry, you cannot create fat out of nothing. You can't. So flashback to 7 years prior, Anna talks about receiving an email where someone suggests that she may have lipedema.
About 7 years prior to this, I got an email from a woman and she wrote me an email and was like, I think you have this condition called lipedema.
And here's where I came in. I'm sure there are plenty of people at this point who are sick of me talking about lipedema. Was it Zachary Michael has a couple times referred to me as a lipedema reaction channel, which is great. I love it. Please keep doing it. Have I mentioned that I'm not a doctor yet? I'm not a doctor, but I feel at this point that I've proved to you hopefully and to myself that I have a good understanding of lipedema that hopefully goes beyond the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you have a little piece of information and assume you know everything about it. I don't. I would never claim to know everything about lipedema because even the top experts in lipedema don't know everything there is to know about it. But I feel enough. So she says she receives this email from a random woman saying that she thinks that Anna has lipedema, and Anna talks about how she feels bad for talking shit about this woman.
It is so uncool to try to diagnose somebody on the internet. And I unfortunately talked mad shit about this woman behind her back. And I feel bad because at that point, I just was sick of people telling me what they thought about my health. And so I totally tuned it out.
And I'm like, no, I don't think you should feel bad. I agree with what you said. It is very uncool. It's very strange for someone to try to diagnose someone else via internet. That's something I talked about in my lipedema video. Something else that I remembered from doing that video was that Anna specifically said, in a very old video, that it was someone from the charitable arm of an organization that researches lipedema that reached out to her.
And then from there, a nurse reached out to me, someone who worked in the charitable arm of an organization that researches lipedema reached out to me. Basically, I had a lot of professionals in the area of studying lipedema reach out to me and tell me that I have this condition.
And my mind automatically goes to, that was probably the FDRS. I have no way of knowing that for sure, but I have a heavy suspicion, and I also know enough about the FDRS to not trust that.
I didn't even believe it was a real condition. I think I need to say that. I need to say that I thought it was something made up.
Not only did she think, I don't have that, she also thought, that doesn't sound like a real condition. So she does mention that actually several of the doctors that she started seeing when she was actually going on her, her big health journey that she's been going on for the past couple years, several of those doctors brought up lipedema to her, and she continued to dismiss it, she says. Even though she kept dismissing it, and she kept thinking in her mind that this isn't a real condition, yet she brought it up to her obesity specialist.
The obesity specialist doctor, I did bring up lipedema with her, mostly because I had received that email before. I'd had other doctors allude to that potentially being a problem, but did not understand the condition enough to actually say for sure if it was. And I just wanted a diagnosis. Sometimes you just want someone to tell you like, yep, that's it. So you feel a little less crazy. So I brought it up with her and she was like, yeah, like immediately. Yeah. And then I was like, you're just going to say yes. And she's like, well, we'll do a couple things, but yeah.
All right. So the obesity specialist immediately was like, yes, you have lipedema. And now we get to hear Anna go on to describe what she thinks lipedema is.
It was kind of one of those things where like, it's pretty obvious I have it because I don't have any weight on my hands and my feet with how big I am. And because I have orange peel texture, because I have certain ways of accumulation, because it's completely symmetrical, because it's in certain parts of my body. There's just a lot of things that indicate.
And obviously, as I've come to find, that is not what lipedema is. There are two requirements to the diagnosis of lipedema, which is the abnormal fat distribution. The other is the vital symptom of pain. They often seem to leave out that symptom and also pile on a bunch of other symptoms that are unrelated. And so Dr. Nance, orthopedic surgeon, goes on to give her definition of lipedema.
Lipedema is a condition where the fat gets almost clumped together in a way that it will never go away with diet and exercise. So it's a type of fat that is different from the normal fat in your body and doesn't respond to the typical ways how fat expands and decreases. So it primarily accumulates on the thighs. Sometimes it can accumulate on the arms, but the character of the fat is also different. So whereas most fat is yellow and spongy, lipedema is typically more hard and isn't as mobile as regular fat. Lipedema is a real condition. It is difficult to differentiate between what is lipedemia and what is just, say, fat as part of general obesity. But specifically, lipedema does not respond to the general ways of how to decrease fat. And so you may be doing a lot of exercising and a lot of dieting, and you may never lose that fat.
When I was listening to this, I just said nope out loud to nobody. As a side note, just something I noticed. Dr. Nance at one point slips and accidentally says lipedemia. People mispronounce lipedema all the time. It sounds like lymphedema. It's a weird word. People mispronounce it. It's fine. But lipedemia is another condition that refers to having too many lipids in your blood. So it is like another thing. And what this says to me, in my opinion, is that I feel like she's probably not very familiar with lipedema. She doesn't need to be. She's an orthopedic surgeon. Why would she be familiar with lipedema? My problem is to me, it's giving me that vibe of the three finger. You know the meme, the three fingers meme. It's giving me that a little bit because Dr. Nance is on this podcast primarily, I think, to lend credence to a lot of what Anna's saying. I feel like either Anna gave this definition to her or she got it from someone like Dr. Herbst, and she doesn't really know what she's talking about. It indicates to me that she's not as well versed in this subject as she is portraying herself to be.
So when I started talking about potentially having this condition, I received so much backlash that it must be just made up, which is crazy. Like, I am an adult woman with a good education, and still, when enough people tell you that you're crazy, you begin to wonder if you're the problem. So my obesity doctor did officially give me that diagnosis and was basically like, I'm out of my depth at this point. You need to go see a lipedema specialist. So we did some research. We picked a couple doctors, which I then flew to LA because they were all in LA, the ones that were pretty active in research.
She had to, because that's where all the research is. Again, the structuring. I'm calling it structuring because it's more polite to call it structuring than to call it lying. But it's an untruth. She said specifically before that she looked for doctors in other places, including her home state of Texas, but most of the surgeons that she saw wouldn't operate on people of her size.
I flew to LA and I saw several doctors about potentially having surgery. I had also done some research about doctors in my area in Texas. I ultimately decided against local doctors because some of them had BMI requirements or they just did not have enough experience with advanced stage cases.
But we know who would operate on someone of her size, and we know who's in LA. She's like, yeah, LA is where all the research is happening. And I'm like, well, no, that's just where Dr. Amron and Dr. Schwartz are, the two plastic surgery practices that Dr. Herbst is involved with. And if you're not familiar with me, and you're not familiar with Dr. Herbst, we're going to get into her a little bit later. And it's so wild to me. She keeps insisting upon this point that she was skeptical and she had so many doubts the whole time, even though she was, promoting everything online and she was trying to raise awareness and speak about lipedema. She still is holding to this point that she was still skeptical.
You go see this doctor and he's like, whoa, you got real bad lipedema. Like, it is real bad. You need to have surgery sooner rather than later. Now, I've got to go back to that feeling about lipedema. I still, at this point, even though I was posting about it, talking about it, because I was trying to justify my body, but internally, deep down inside, I still was like, is this a made-up illness? Is this a doctor in LA who wants to sell me plastic surgery? Because also that is what I heard from a lot of people online.
And she says that she even had, a little inkling in the back of her mind. What if this plastic surgeon is just trying to sell me a surgery? Spoiler alert. Yeah, I think he probably was. And then, of course, she has to talk about, the haters online. People telling her she was cheating. People telling her it was a cop-out and she should be dieting and exercising instead of getting this surgery.
I heard every single day about how I was taking the easy way out and that I was cheating and that I was going to this doctor to magically fix my problems rather than, diet and exercise, calorie in, calorie out solutions. And so
I grappled with that even through the surgery process, but I mentally decided if I knew I couldn't lose weight by making the healthy choices I'd made, then what was wrong with trying to get to a better body in this route? I just wanted to feel alive again, because I think once you have a taste of that lifestyle and you're like, wow, if it was just like 25% better than this, then what are all the things I could do? Because I was still limited, right? So I was like, well, what if I can open up just more activity, more movement, more living?
And yeah, I was saying those things. I wouldn't call it cheating. I would call it willful ignorance, and in combination with being taken advantage of, possibly. It makes me really sad to hear her, if it's true, to hear her say that she had a thought, what if this surgeon is taking advantage of me, and she didn't stick with that intuition. That really makes me sad. And the thing that irritates me the most, I think, about this whole thing is that she claims that she did everything. She did everything that she possibly could to not just lose weight, but, to get the life that she wants, right? She says she did everything, so why not try this? But Anna, you didn't. You didn't try the very one thing that I think would help you, and that is weight loss surgery. And I am not the type of person that would usually say something like that. I have mixed feelings about bariatric surgery, right? People look at it as, again, cheating or a cop-out. And it's not. It's very difficult. It is hard, but it is a tool. And it's something that I feel someone like Anna, who has claimed to have tried everything, what's left, that is what's left. And she refuses to even give it a chance. She claims she had so many doubts about whether this condition, lipedema, was even real. She had doubts about whether the surgeon was just selling her plastic surgery, right? That's what she's claiming. But she won't try the one thing that I think would really help her, and that is endlessly frustrating to me. So she talks about her surgery journey. She never names Dr. Amron, but she says that her doctor said that she was the most fibrotic he had ever seen. She talks about how she felt like instant relief, and she even addressed the thing that a lot of us were thinking was, were you dancing around after surgery because you were instantly better, or were you dancing around because you were still a little sleepy?
I get through the first surgery and instantly my pain levels are entirely different. The first night in the recovery area, I'm dancing. I'm up on my feet dancing because they tell us we have to walk. And the nurse has to be like, yo, calm down. And everyone tells me, oh, it's the pain meds. Once the pain meds come off from surgery and elbow. No, never went back. I was just like, my life was instantly better. And I was like, oh my God. And I still didn't believe that this was a medical condition deep in my heart. I still thought it was just fat, but that my legs were lighter and that's why everything was better.
And yet, even having experienced that, she talks about still having doubts, which again is very hard for me to believe, but all right. I feel that she didn't cover her second surgery in the same way that she covered her first surgery, which is fine. But the reason for that is probably because of what she talks about, which was it was a much worse recovery, and she also went through kind of a depression after that surgery, which is something I've heard happens to people. Surgery is rough on your body, but it's also rough on your brain.
So of course, I heal to the point where I can for the next surgery. I have my second round of surgeries. My second surgery was really intense. You get a lot of hormone release. So I got depression, but it was like weird because I've never been depressed. So it's not something I have ever dealt with.
I'm sorry she went through that. I'm especially sorry that I feel she went through that unnecessarily. Suddenly, we take a hard left turn to talk about, believe it or not, Bagelgate.
So while I was recovering from surgery, I started having these really weird comments about bagels. And I was like, why? I don't understand why I'm getting all these comments about bagels. And so I had to ask, what is going on in relation to bagels? I don't understand it. So previously to having surgery, we recorded a video where my doctor had asked me to keep walking.
prior to surgery, even though my pain had increased significantly because I'd gone off of the Wegovy. So I walk, and at various times during this walk, I have to stop and sit down because I'm in pain. And we get to the bagel shop. It is literally just before close. And so we get our bagel, we get in a cab, we drive home. I get home to the hotel. I'm filming myself unwrapping it, and it's not the bagel I ordered. It's not the bagel I walked 2 miles. Now, to set context here, I'm having surgery in 2 days. I've been off of all of this medication that helps me stay regular in a lot of different ways. So I am a hormonal nightmare, right? I'm also in a lot of pain. So I just start bawling over this bagel, right? I just am like literally buckets of tears because this is all the stress of my first surgery coming out. This is all the hormones that are rolling around in my body. This is everything coming out. This is the pain I'm feeling because it hurts. So I am crying over this bagel, and I was like, I just wanted this bagel, right? And then the next day I order the bagel, and that's the end of the video. And I'm like, I got it. It's fine, right? So they pick this video up, and they make so many videos about fat girl cries over bagel. And they turn it into a fat girl doesn't get what she wants, and so she cries. They erase the entire part about the fact that it had literally nothing to do with the bagel. The bagel was just the thing that I was crying about, but it was like very
bagel.
It's not about. And this is what people started to say. So people started commenting Bagelgate, and then started commenting it was never about the bagel. So this turns into this whole thing where people are just talking about bagels vaguely around me, and I have no clue what's going on, right? And they knew I was in surgery. They knew that I was having this major surgery, and that's the thing they decided to go in on, is that I cried over a bagel. And I'm just like, y'all, I just had a major surgery. There was no compassion for me as a human being at all. And then I begin to wonder, is it really worth going through this 2 or 3 more times? It's hard. Recovery is a process. Even with the great results I had from the first surgery, recovery from a major surgery is rough. So everything's kind of on pause, right? And I even moved my surgeries a little bit later. And I honestly, my doctor's going to listen to this and be like, you were considering not doing your other surgeries. I'm sure of it.
And I don't know what to say. I just don't know what to say. It is absolutely wild to me that anyone would take some flack over a silly, stupid thing that happened on the internet and, honest to God, think to themselves, should I alter my entire medical trajectory? Should I reconsider treating my illnesses in the way that I think they should be treated because some people made fun of me for crying about a bagel? I don't have any words.
Again, I thought I was delusional. I still at this point thought that this was a fake condition, even though I was advocating for it and talking about it. I feel like such a scam.
Oh, and then ends that story wondering, am I still being delusional? I'm so skeptical. I'm having doubts. Anyway.
They just took 22 liters total, so 50 pounds out of my body. And I was heavier than the day I went in for my first surgery. And that was crazy. That was unusual. So they had me go see a specialist in Tucson. Her name is Dr. Herbst. So Dr. Herbst is a board-certified endocrinologist that is actually researching the genetics related to fat disorders like lipedema, for example. And if you know anything about lipedema, she is the OG. She is the queen. She's the queen.
All right, let's talk about this alleged queen, shall we? For those of you unfamiliar, I'm just going to give you a brief breakdown of Dr. Herbst and all my issues with her. So Dr. Herbst has kind of positioned herself as the utmost authority on lipedema in the United States, and I guess she's endeavoring to probably do that elsewhere. The US is not the only place where a lot of misconceptions and false ideas of lipedema exist, but I feel like the problem is especially bad in the US, and I think it's especially because of Dr. Herbst. So my main issue with Dr. Herbst, besides what I feel is a lot of misinformation that she spreads, is also that she has a ton of conflicts of interest. Like I mentioned, she's involved with 2 plastic surgeons. She's involved with a compression garment company. She's involved with the Fat Disorders Resource Society, or FDRS, which I mentioned briefly earlier. She's involved with Lipedema Simplified. Like, if there's any kind of lipedema organization, etc., she's probably got her hands in it, She's got her fingers in all the pies. And one of the things she is most popular for is that she was the lead author on the standard of care guidelines for lipedema in the United States. And there are a ton of problems with that document. First of all, being that all of the people on that standard of care committee were like handpicked by a very wealthy philanthropist with lipedema and some questionable ideas about lipedema. And a lot of the things in the standard of care do not match up to real concrete evidence that we have about lipedema. Number one, they don't believe that pain is necessarily a requirement. They think it's a common symptom, but they don't think it's necessary. Number two, they think lipedema is progressive. Dr. Herbst and her associates will continually say that sometimes lipedema just progresses, you can't stop it, and it defies the laws of thermodynamics. They wouldn't say that, but it would. They say lipedema is confused for obesity, which is absolutely not the case. They also promote the idea that there is fluid edema in lipedema, which is not the case. We have no evidence to show this. There are a lot of reasons why she promotes this edema theory, and we'll get into some of that in a bit too. And I think there's been plenty of evidence of Dr. Herbst fudging evidence, misrepresenting things, or making a lot of wild speculation, presenting it as fact, and not actually having any evidence to back up her claims. But I think a lot of the reason people like her is because she is exceptionally personable and compassionate, and she makes herself extremely likable. And it's very hard when you think about people like Anna, who have no doubt had horrible experiences with doctors. The doctors who are legitimately fat phobic, I think, are pushing people like Anna to Dr. Herbst. Now, what I will say is I'm sure there are also plenty of examples of doctors who are just telling it straight to you how it is, not trying to be rude, not being fat phobic, but just telling people the straight up facts. And there are patients who just don't like that and don't believe it, and so they go doctor shopping. And I have reason to believe that's a lot of what Anna has done here. I think she shopped her co-host, you know what I mean? So Anna finally saw Dr. Herbst, and I didn't cover this specific video because I was about to cover Dr. Herbst in extreme detail when I was in the midst of making my lipedema video. There were a lot of things in this visit that she's about to reference that I thought were extremely troubling. So Dr. Herbst used this like thermal imaging thing. It looks like an app on her phone. I'm not familiar with that. I've seen people say that this is fine, but also seen people express some doubts about whether a doctor should be using this kind of thing as a diagnostic tool. So, you know what? I'm not going to touch that. Point is, it looks like Dr. Herbst uses this to help her find areas of interest to then ultrasound. I have less of a problem with that.
I go and see her. I'm still having all of this inside. I'm still debating if I'm going to do the other surgeries. I'm like, is this worth it? Is this just cosmetic? I'm starting to have, with the inflammation, a lot of exhaustion and stuff like that, which is natural with inflammation. So she does two things that caused the aha moment for me. She's like, I'm going to do some, I don't know the name of this, but it is a thing where they do thermal imaging to see how congested your veins are. So they take pictures and it shows almost like a heat map where your veins are enlarged and trapped. So she does thermal imaging of my body, lets me see it, and I can see everywhere that I haven't had surgery is bright purple. On my hands, my feet, my face, and points to a bump on my arm, which I thought was a fat roll. I'm going to be very real with you. I thought it was a fat. And she shows me what's going on under there. And it is a vein that is, I guess, leaked. And sitting under here, and this is the area I haven't had surgery at, I'm having in January, is just a giant pool of plasma that is just sitting in my body. And you can see it. It's wild.
Here's a vessel in your arm.
Yeah.
That black spot. It should show a color if it's a vessel. It doesn't because it's a vein and there's slow flow.
Okay.
But do you see this around it?
Yeah. What
That's
is
a
that?
leak.
So what is that? Lymphatic or blood? Or
Blood.
what? There's blood leaking in my arm?
Well, it's more likely plasma, so no red blood cells, but absolutely.
What does that mean?
Well, that happens in that's lipedema right there.
Okay.
Now this is the part that really concerns me. Leaking plasma is like a big deal, apparently. I wasn't familiar with this as a concept, but when I looked it up, like, it is a symptom of some things, and it's a very, like, urgent symptom. It's usually associated with things like dengue, I think is how you pronounce it. Just like a very serious illness. Capillary leak syndrome. And what's so just unbelievably bizarre to me is that Dr. Herbst would say, yeah, you're leaking plasma, but that's just lipedema. Because no, it absolutely is not. You will not even find any kind of paper, any kind of study, any kind of anything that says anything about leaking plasma. Like I mentioned, the edema, the fluid that people like Dr. Herbst claim is involved in lipedema has not been demonstrated. Quite often, people with lipedema will go on to develop lymphedema, but we have a lot of good evidence that obesity causes lymphedema. We have no evidence that lipedema causes lymphedema. And lymphedema is when your lymph system doesn't work properly, and so it pools. It settles, usually in your legs and sometimes your arms. A lot of it is because of gravity, honestly. It's just because your system can't pump lymph properly. So usually, when you hear people like Dr. Herbst talk about fluid, they're usually talking about lymph, and they just claim that you can't see the lymph or whatever kind of fluid before it develops into lymphedema. Like, we have no good evidence that that's truly the case, but that is the claim that she makes. Never in any of that has plasma ever been involved. Like, you might hear her talk about extracellular water even, like interstitial fluid even. Plasma? Question mark? This is a new one on me. We also know that during this visit, Dr. Herbst said that Anna doesn't have lymphedema, which is wild to me because Dr. Amron said she did, and even Anna herself claimed that she did at one point. And I'm really struggling with this because, to me, personally, it feels like Dr. Herbst is just scrambling for whatever kind of fluid she can point to because she needs it. She needs it to make the kinds of claims that she makes. Because a lot of the claims that Dr. Herbst makes are that this fluid, this hypothetical invisible fluid that we can't see, is responsible for fat growth and progression of lipedema, which I know to not be the case. Lipedema is not progressive. Obesity is absolutely progressive. But, if lipedema progresses and we can't stop it because it's this fluid condition that we have no control over, then of course, it's so much easier to sell people treatments that they really don't need, like liposuction and all the other weird things that Dr. Herbst does. And Anna claims it was this exact moment, this moment where Dr. Herbst claimed she had leaking plasma, that was the moment where she finally accepted that lipedema was real and she had it.
And sitting under here, and this is the area I haven't had surgery yet, I'm having in January, is just a giant pool of plasma that is just sitting in my body, and you can see it. It's wild. And that's when it clicked for me that this is a real illness.
Which is the most aggravating thing about this whole thing, because how do you claim to be an ambassador for a surgeon who specializes in lipedema? How do you promote someone like Dr. Herbst, who is the leading expert in the US? How do you get online and present all this information, and as much as she denies this, but position yourself as kind of an authority figure when talking about lipedema, how can you do all of that and not even understand what lipedema is, even by incorrect standards? You know what I'm saying? Even the incorrect definitions, like everything that we have. How? I just want to know how. So, the other thing that Dr. Herbst promotes at her practice in Arizona is gene testing. And I have so many mixed feelings about the idea of doing that. Gene testing is real. Gene testing is useful. I don't trust Dr. Herbst to use that information responsibly. I mean, in my opinion, she's just showed that she can't use an ultrasound responsibly. So the reason that Dr. Herbst specifically wanted to test Anna's genes is because she says that Anna is producing scar tissue at a rapid rate.
She's looking at all this and she goes, let me take a look at your thighs. And she looks down at my thighs and she's like, oh my gosh, it's like teeth. I've never seen this before. And this is where I just had surgery. So I produce very quickly, or at least we see from this ultrasound, scar tissue. I produce scar tissue at a rapid rate because I had literally had surgery 3 weeks before. I should not have had the level of fibrosis that I had in my legs. And she literally, like, this is the woman that's seen every lipedema patient in the planet, looks at it and goes, oh my gosh, I've never seen this before, which is not what you want to hear, by the
Never
way.
a comforting feeling.
No, not a great feeling. And then she goes, I want to talk to you about your genes. And this becomes the first time I begin to understand what these genes do.
Because as we all know, Anna is terminally unique. Nothing that applies to everyone else could ever apply to Anna. I cannot make any bold, grand claims about whether Dr. Herbst is a good doctor or whether she's doing anything that resembles malpractice or anything like that. I'm just saying, from what I know about her, I do not trust her, and I could absolutely see a world in which Anna is just gaining weight because she has been gaining weight for a very long time. I could see a world in which she's just gaining weight after the surgery she had, and Dr. Herbst could be telling her that it's this fibrosis, this scar tissue, because she doesn't want Anna to think that the surgery didn't work. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying I could see a world in which that might be the case. And I'm suspicious. I'm just suspicious of this whole thing. I'm very suspicious of Dr. Herbst. I think it's very important to mention that during that interview that I did with Dr. Birch, he says that his colleagues treat Dr. Herbst like a joke, like treat her theories as a joke. Like, it's just very troubling to me. So Anna gets some more gene testing. So Anna is talking about she has some kind of genes, these exceptionally rare genes that will never be researched because they're so rare, that that prevent apoptosis. Well, she doesn't say apoptosis. She says like apoptosis or something like that. Just proving that she's the authority that we want on this podcast to be talking about this thing.
So she pulls her computer aside. She sits me down. She says, I want to talk to you about your genes. And she goes, you have two very interesting variants, and they're both related to the same thing. And she goes, they're related to apoptosis. And I'm like, well, what the hell is that? From what I gathered, my dead cells do not properly leave the body, and they cause havoc. So that would explain scar tissue forming. It would explain estrogen that was supposed to be taken out of the body not leaving properly. It would explain inflammation problems, not having, clear routes to getting things out of the body.
Well, what's interesting is, and it may be something different, but I don't think so, but apoptosis.
Oh, that's what it is. Yes. Okay.
Sorry. So apoptosis is the process in which a cell
Yes,
dies.
that's it. Sorry, I
how
honestly
the
don't know
body
anything yet.
clears the cells. No, you were actually explaining it perfectly. And it is normal for all of our cells to go through this process of dying and then regenerating.
Essentially, this is the person that is most experienced in this who has never seen this gene before. This pairing of genes, and they are both related to apoptosis. There's limited information, i.e. there's no medical research written about it. It's either been hypothesized or tracked in some way, but it's not like there's no knowledge of other than it's related to this function, what it actually does. So now we know that these genes caused all my symptoms, the weight stuff, the anemia, the lipedema, the tumor, the thyroid issues, but we can't really do anything about it.
I don't personally have enough information to say whether or not Anna has this problem. I don't. I wouldn't. But I do have enough information to say no one is genetically like 500 pounds. That's just nothing. It's a rhetoric you see a lot in like fat acceptance and health at every size spaces. I know there are people who have different perspectives on what fat acceptance and health at every size mean, but there's a very specific corner of the internet especially where people are just so anti-science it hurts. You know what I mean? Up to and including believing that people can be 400, 500, 600 pounds just purely genetically, not because of their diet, which is no. Just no. Like I can't even entertain that because it's ridiculous. And as mad as I am that Anna is using her platform to spread this misinformation, like I am angry about that, I'm even more angry that there are medical professionals out there who would promote this message You know, as much blame as I do place onto Anna for not exercising critical thinking and for spreading this horrible misinformation to her followers, I'm even more angry at not only Dr. Herbst for feeding all of this stuff to Anna, but I'm also really angry at Dr. Nance for sitting there with Anna on this podcast and challenging none of it. I don't understand how Anna can get on this podcast and talk about the times where she has lost and gained weight so many different times, lost and gained weight over all the years, and yet still claim that she has some kind of rare genetic problem that causes her to be the size that she is. I really think, honestly, this podcast showed me that we've reached the pinnacle, you know? I think we've reached really the point of no return. I'm kind of a terminal optimist. I've used that phrase to describe myself a lot. Up until this point, have had hope for Anna, you know, that eventually she would see the truth and she would get the help that she really, truly, desperately needs and would stop spreading misinformation. But I don't know how we come back from rare genetic illness as told to her by a real medical doctor, an endocrinologist. I don't know how we come back from that. Yeah. Yep. That's how I'm feeling about all this. Because the lipedema thing irritates me because there are a lot of people with lipedema, not in the percentages that a lot of people would have you believe, but there are a lot of people with lipedema, you know? And I think that messaging has been really harmful to them. This very hopeless message that your condition is progressive and the only thing that'll help is liposuction, and you can't lose weight no matter what you do. I think it's a very hopeless and cruel message to give to people. But I think this rare genetic illness thing is a completely different animal. By definition, it's extremely rare, and no one really knows what it is, allegedly. And could there possibly be an uptick of people who come away from this podcast wondering if they have the same problem? Quite possibly. But I also think this is such a uniquely Anna problem now. By definition, it is a uniquely Anna problem. Nothing anyone will ever say to her will probably ever change her mind. And that is so scary. That is so scary. And I don't know, I say that, but then I also think about the things she said towards the end of the podcast.
There is a community of doctors who still do believe that obesity is the individual's fault. And it's not like 10% of our population is overweight. It's like 60% of our population. All these people are getting overweight. What is going on? Our genetics could be changing. Our food could be changing. Our environments could be changing. Our socioeconomic situations could be changing. What is causing people to gain weight? So let's take the morality out of it completely. Like, let's take the choice out of it and say it's not a person's choice. So if it's not their choice, if nobody would choose this, we have to start looking at this as something that's actually a medical issue.
I feel like she's insinuating that human beings' genetics are changing. Like right now, human beings' genetics are always changing, sure. But like, with a straight face, I'm assuming with a straight face, I don't think there's a video element of this podcast, but with a straight face, she's trying to say people have gained weight at an exceptionally rapid rate, especially in the US. Obesity is unfortunately extremely common. She thinks our genetics just did that. Coincidentally, at the exact same time that our food environment revolutionarily changed. I'm so terrified by the lack of scientific literacy. This is not the first time that I've seen this argument about like human beings' genetics are changing or whatever, and that's why we're suddenly all overweight and obese. That's just not how evolution works. I'm so tired. This podcast took a lot out of me. I listened to it, sped up, and it still felt like the biggest slog of my life. I had more notes, but I don't have anything else to say, really, honestly, truly. So in conclusion, Anna continues to spread massive amounts of misinformation. Her doctors continue to be exceptionally questionable and also spreading massive amounts of misinformation. I'm curious to see if this podcast goes on. I don't have any faith in either of these two co-hosts to communicate science or medicine accurately or effectively. I think this podcast is going to do a lot more harm than good. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I am working on a longer video essay about another subject that I've gotten interested in. Not sure when that's going to be done. I promise it won't be 3.5 hours. And so I'll try to keep you updated about that. So see you next time.